All right. Who can talk to me here? Someone say hello as I want to make sure that everyone is set to go.
Yes.
Gordon Pang, my friend, I hear you. And I could hear you, which is nice. And I did give you permission to record, although you may not be recording. Is there anyone there who would like to tell me? Can we please get permission to record? Yeah, hold on there. Oh, you got it. Good deal. That was from KITV. I see you got permission. I have set up this in a way that I think I can monitor it from elsewhere while Dr. Kemble sits here and talks. And I should be able to monitor chat. So if you have any issues that you, for whatever reason, get bumped out and need back in, or if you do not have permission to record, or anything else going on, please let me know and I will try to take care of whatever needs you have. Did you folks get a press release minutes ago?
Yes, we did.
Okay, beautiful. Want to make sure that that got sent. Thank you, Nikki. And that's what we will be talking about. Yet another variant has been detected here in Hawaii, and we do have a couple more incidents of the B117 variant, which some call the UK variant. So again, we have for explanation and further detail, Dr. Sarah Kemble, who is the acting state epidemiologist in the Disease Outbreak Control Division, and Dr. Ed Desmond, who heads up the State Laboratories Division. He's the director there, and you're becoming, unfortunately, well aware of who these people are because we keep finding new variants and having to update the situation. So without further ado, I'm going to have Sarah Kemble, who has just walked into the room, come join you. They will give some opening remarks. And then if you can, let's stick to variants for a while. I know some of you may have other questions. Dr. Kemble has to leave sharply at 10:55. So without further ado, I give you Ed Desmond and Sarah Kemble.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
Do you want to lead off?
Go ahead, Ed, with the new.
Okay, you just got into your chair, so I'll lead off. Okay, so yeah, we have, as you may recall, about 3 weeks ago have found the UK variant, the B117, which is associated with higher transmissibility. It's more readily transmitted from one person to another. And probably a big part of the reason for this is it has a particular mutation called N501Y. And in the intervening period of time, in the past 3 weeks or so, we have found several strains, several variants that have a different mutation. It's called E484K. And this is associated with reduced effectiveness of antibodies. So if a person is infected, has an infection with SARS-CoV-2, or if they get the vaccination, the antibodies that they form may be less effective against a strain that has this mutation. And the new news today is that we have the B1351 variant, which has both of these mutations. So it is both more transmissible and less responsive to the antibodies that we form as a result of infection or vaccination. So Sarah, do you want to add to that?
Sure, thanks, Ed. So on the epidemiology front, we've been actively investigating these cases as they get reported to us by the State Laboratories Division. The newly detected B1351 variant, which is that variant that originated in South Africa, was in a Oahu resident with no travel history. And those close contacts of that case are in quarantine and being tested. The other two B117 variant cases are in Oahu residents, one of whom traveled to the US mainland, and a household contact of that individual who developed symptoms a few days after their exposure to that individual. So that's the latest epidemiology. The investigations are ongoing and additional testing being performed. The questions about vaccination and the ability to still have effective vaccine against these variants is an important one. I do think, although in the test tube, there have been some studies showing that more antibodies are needed to overcome some of the variants with the mutation that Dr. Desmond was talking about with the E4, E4K. Overall, the real world data has been reassuring. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine was tested in South Africa, where this variant predominates and is still effective in that country, especially against the severe outcomes of hospitalization and death. So that's important to keep in mind. Vaccine is still a key mitigation strategy, and it's still really important to get the vaccine when it's your turn. And I'll pause there for questions.
Hi, I'm with the Tribune Herald and Hilo. Does this variant, or do these variants, does it affect the severity of illness? Do you know?
Not to our knowledge. Neither of these variants is clearly associated with more severe disease, but they have been spreading more rapidly in the areas where they are occurring. And so there's the thought that they are more transmissible.
One of the items of concern is that there have been a few instances where a person who was previously infected with a strain that did not have the E484K mutation, then was subsequently infected by a new strain that had this E484K mutation, like the South African variant. So that creates some concern that immunity is not absolute when you have one of these variant strains.
Dr. Kemble, does that at all change the strategy that the state is taking? Or are we still going to do the same things, or is that?
Mm-hmm. Our strategy remains the same. So the key to the variants is to control virus. So if we're controlling the spread of the virus, whether we do it through masking, physical distancing, hand washing, and staying home when sick, or whether we do it through vaccination or combination, the combination is best, and that's the current strategy. That's still going to slow down spread of all of these variant viruses as well. And that slowing down the spread gives them less chance to further mutate and potentially cause additional problems. So the strategies are the same. It's a real reason to maintain both of those strategies together. So to continue, especially in the broader public spaces, masking, physical distancing, and avoiding being in contact with others if you're sick. That's going to avoid spreading any of these variants, as well as the strains that we are more accustomed to from before.
Given the announcement by the CDC that, hey, if everybody's, if you're vaccinated, you can gather indoors without masks, would you advise against that?
So the CDC released new guidance today about what it means if you've been vaccinated. And I think it's about time. It's really important to recognize that vaccination is an effective strategy, and to explain better what it is that allows us more freedom to do. The freedoms here, though, it's still important to be very cognizant of who may still be at risk. And so what CDC is saying is, if you are fully vaccinated and others in your household are fully vaccinated, then you could have a gathering together without masks on because you all have had vaccine. The chance of you infecting each other is basically nil. Now, if you're gathering with people who are not vaccinated, you have to make some risk decisions. If you're going to be gathering with somebody who is at high risk of severe outcomes, you really need to continue the physical distancing and the masking. If you're meeting with people who understand the risk of infection, but they believe their risk of severe outcomes may be low, then that's a situation where you could consider not masking. But this is really still limited to small gatherings in private spaces. In public spaces, we need all the layers of mitigation we can get right now as people continue to be vaccinated in the entire population.
Dr. Kemble, do we have an age range for the resident on Oahu who got the South African variant? And also, when do we expect close contact results to come back in?
The South African variant case is in an adult, and there are some household contacts who have also tested positive. We are also doing investigation of a workplace.
So how many total cases of this variant that we know of here in Hawaii?
The South African variant, we've identified one case that has been sequenced with this variant at the State Laboratories Division. However, there are some positive contacts who we assume to also have the same variant.
So do you have a total number?
I don't have the total number right now. The investigation is actively ongoing and it may be changing as I speak, but we will be able to report on that in the coming week.
And then Dr. Campbell, is this a concern for you? I mean, no travel history, of course, could indicate community spread, but I know the Department of Health, or it's recommended that elderly get the Moderna Pfizer just because it's more protective. But since Johnson & Johnson is more effective against the South African variant, would we switch up maybe, you know, that elderly should maybe consider getting J&J instead?
So to take those questions in order, yes, it's concerning to see the South African variant here and in a non-traveler, because just as we saw with the earlier B117 cases, that means there has already been some circulation in our community, even if it may be limited at this time. That means we do have to keep an eye out for these variants because they're going to be out there. Now, as far as vaccine, Johnson & Johnson happens to have tested their vaccine in South Africa where the variant was widespread. The trials for Pfizer and Moderna were not done in that setting. So it's not that we know they're not effective. We just don't have all of the data on Pfizer and Moderna. From a scientific standpoint, there's no reason to think it would perform any less well than the Johnson & Johnson has at this point, but the studies just haven't been done yet. So right now, vaccine recommendations are not changed. It's still get the vaccine that's available to you. If you have a preference for one or the other based on the number of doses or the side effects, that's still a choice that's fair to make. I wouldn't say there's anything in the data right now to steer you towards one or the other based on the variant being here.
And I have another question. Are the symptoms any worse than typical coronavirus with the South African variant?
Not that we're aware of. Our case here was hospitalized, but that's a single case, so hard to draw additional conclusions from that. The individual has recovered and is back at home.
Dr. Kimball, if I can jump in, this is Max Dybel from Big Island. I'm curious, I've gotten some questions from people, you know, they're out on like a week or 2 weeks out on the wait list to get their vaccine. And what they're wondering about, because there's been guidance that kind of goes back and forth, nobody's ever really addressed this. If you get sick, let's say you come down with symptoms that might be COVID and you're supposed to get a vaccine in 3 or 4 days, you know, maybe say a week. You know, obviously if you're ill, you're probably not supposed to go to the site, correct? But let's say you begin to recover or you feel better after a few days. Should they still be pursuing a vaccine if they just recently had the virus, or should they be waiting 2 or 3 months, as, for instance, Lieutenant Governor Green has said in the past?
So if you have symptoms that concern you for COVID, we do still recommend that everyone who has symptoms of COVID try to go get a test done. If you test negative, then the advice is to stay home until your symptoms are completely resolved, and you can seek vaccination as soon as you've met those criteria. If you test positive, then you should be in isolation. And when your isolation is completed, there's no waiting period. Once you're cleared from isolation, you can go to get your vaccine. Now, if you've had known COVID infection, it is likely that your body has generated enough antibodies to give you protection for at least 3 months. So it's not a big rush to go get the COVID vaccine, but we do encourage people who have been infected with COVID to still get vaccinated. And so I would keep that on the to-do list.
Dr. Campbell, it's Lynn Kawana with Hawaii News Now. So when we talk about choices with the vaccine, DOH had mentioned, you had mentioned that could be coming where people get a choice. How soon do you think people can choose their own vaccine, and what needs to happen before that becomes available?
So right now, you should be able to tell by going on a website which type of vaccine is being offered at a particular pod. And so if that's not the one that you want, you could select a different pod. The same will be true as Johnson & Johnson gets out there. There will be specific pods for Johnson & Johnson vaccine that you can select to go to, or if you would prefer to get Pfizer or Moderna, select one of the pods that's offering those.
Dr. Campbell, given that we just moved into tier 3, so we are opening up a little bit more, would you advise the public now that we're finding, I know you guys were particularly worried about this South African variant, would you advise people to lay low or, maybe not go back to, sports or whatever?
I do think the presence of the variant is the reason to maintain vigilance. This isn't the time to let our guards down and decide, that we're ready to relax. I know that's hard because it's been a long slog, but it is critically important right now to keep our guards up. I do feel that there are essential services and functions such as education that need to move forward at this point. There are negative health effects of not continuing and getting our students back into school, for instance, for in-person learning. I think we're in a good position to move forward with that, but I do think that sports between schools and that may mix communities that wouldn't have otherwise been mixing need to lag behind, making sure we prioritize getting our education back in order first.
Eleni Dr. Campbell and Dr. Desmond, it's been reported that B117 is on track to become the dominant strain in the US. So when and where did the most recent B117 patients in Hawaii travel? And since their infections were confirmed by random surveillance by the state lab, how prevalent do you estimate the UK and South Africa variants to be here in the island community?
I could speak to the travel question. These travelers had gone to Las Vegas. And then as far as the proportion, I'll pass that to Dr. Desmond.
Our survey is not designed to answer your question, Eleni. We're not really quite able to be precise as far as the percent of cases that are due to this variant. Our testing algorithm is more designed to detect these mutants, to cast a wide net and detect them, rather than get a precise estimation of their frequency. I would say that in the past 3 weeks, we have had 8 cases of B117. It seems to be increasing over time. That's about all I can tell you right now. We are going to revise our testing algorithm to be able to answer your question. We'll be able to identify which are the community strains that represent sort of a random collection and are suitable for estimating prevalence. We will have an answer to your question within a few weeks.
And I guess we can say that at least for those that were selected from community samples, there's been one B117 and one B1351 identified that way. So one of the UK variant, one of the South African variant identified that way. So as an overall proportion, just a roughly speaking, it's pretty small from our entire community sample. We are seeing a lot more growth of that B1429 variant that came from California, but that one is not associated with any concerns about antibody response or it is potentially slightly more transmissible, but it hasn't been raised to the level of concern of these two that we're talking about today.
Dr. Campbell, we were told that there weren't going to be Johnson & Johnson vaccines arriving this week. We got last week. Did you get any reason why, and do you expect to start getting them back again next week?
We were told by the federal government that what was initially available through the manufacturers was distributed last week, and that there might be a little bit of a pause before the ramp up to follow that. That's the information that I have as of today.
Dr. Kimball, when do you folks expect to start expanding vaccination appointments to the next age group, so those 65 and older, as well as the next phase?
We're looking very closely at that, seeing how quickly we're able to accommodate our 70+ group with appointments this week, and we hope to have more information on that very soon.
And Dr. Campbell, kind of jumping on what Ali was just saying, the neighbor islands clearly obviously have a smaller population of 70 to 74-year-olds. Some have already been vaccinated who might be in care homes. Is the Department of Health going to make any guidance for places like Hawaii if they speed through the 70 and 74 group to start vaccinating 65 and older, or kind of just wait for Oahu and the rest of the state to get that group done?
All of those allocation decisions are being looked at closely. We are taking under advisement the recommendations from our allocation advisory work group, and DOH leadership is looking at all of those issues as well. I can't tell you today exactly when things will move forward, but we are definitely looking at that.
Dr. Campbell or Dr. Desmond, just to be clear, how many variants of each have we found so far in Hawaii?
Well, we have found 8 of the B117 and 1 of the B1351. We have found other strains that have the mutation that's associated with less response to antibody. We found a P2 variant, which is a Brazilian variant, and some other strains also, unrelated strains, which also have the same mutation. But the answer to your question, B117, 8, and B1351, 1.
So we're less concerned about the Brazilian variant and the others, right? Is that why?
The Brazilian variant is concerning just because of that question mark again about how effective are antibodies against it, but it doesn't carry, this particular Brazilian strain doesn't carry a mutation that would seem to make it more transmissible. So the idea there is just, it may be less concerning just because it may not spread all that well.
I'm wondering, Dr. Kimball or Dr. Desmond, if you guys can elaborate just a little bit more. You talked about this, but just kind of rehash it, maybe elaborate on it a bit more. So the South African variant, you're saying it could be more resistant to vaccines or antibodies developed after infection based on what you're seeing in the lab, but not necessarily based on what you're seeing in the general population. And obviously you're looking at other places in the world since we've identified one case in Hawaii at this point.
Yeah, that's the right idea. There are definite theoretical concerns about how, could this variant be a problem for those who have natural immunity or those who get vaccinated. But so far, the trials that have been done still show that the vaccines that have been tested on this variant still seem to work. So it's a situation we want to watch closely. We obviously want to avoid, to the extent possible, having the variant take over and raise the level of concern about how well vaccines going to work. But right now, the data are promising that we're moving along well with vaccine. We should continue to do so because the more people that are vaccinated, you don't even get a foothold for these viruses. They don't have a chance to pose that threat.
Just a quick follow-up to that, considering the rate at which these variants spread coupled with the loosening of restrictions, do you expect Hawaii will experience another surge in cases in the coming weeks or months?
I'm really curious to see. I think that our case numbers continue to be stable to downtrending overall. And so that's a very promising situation to be in as far as moving through our vaccination campaign and getting a higher proportion of our population fully vaccinated. It is in some ways that race of vaccine against the variant. So if we have enough people vaccinated, we should hope to still see that stable to downtrend. I do think we're at a critical juncture where we want to continue to maintain vigilance, make sure we're still doing masking, physical distancing, and hand washing in those public spaces, not going to work sick. Those things in combination with vaccine can keep us ahead of this.
And none of the patients who had any of the variants diagnosed here in the state were vaccinated, right?
Well, I don't have the answers for your exact numbers today, but there have been, there was at least one case of B117 that did receive vaccine. However, the vaccine was given after the actual exposure. So vaccine isn't going to work if you've already been exposed to the virus and you're incubating it already. So that's one important thing to keep in mind. In that early phase, right after you got your first shot, you're not yet protected. It's really after 14 days after completing a series, whether that's the 2 doses of an mRNA vaccine or the single Johnson & Johnson shot. You need to wait 14 days for your immunity to be up to par. And I have to go, but thank you.
Thanks, everybody. As advertised, Dr. Kemble has to make a quick exit. Her schedule is unbelievably tight, so she is on her way. Thank you, Dr. Kemble. If anyone else has a question that may be appropriate for Dr. Desmond, he is still here and may be able to answer something for you. Otherwise, I'll thank you all for being here.